Hi, Andreas from Toddle here. So one of our users, Jacob, asked us a really interesting question. How can you make a text area in Toddle that automatically resizes based on the content inside it? And the reason why that's quite an interesting question is because that's not actually how text areas work on the web. And so the short answer is you can't actually make a text area adjust to the content inside it. But there is a hack you can do to get that same effect. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. So first I'm going to go and I'm going to create a new component and I'm going to call it, let's call it responsive text area, right? So we're going to create this responsive text area component. And inside this, we're going to add a text area. And for now, we're going to add a variable. And that's actually just for demo, because eventually we're going to want this to take in we're going to want it to take in an attribute and then emit an event. So it kind of works the same way as a normal text area. But for testing purpose, we're going to use a variable because it makes it a little bit easier to test. So I'll show you how that works. And so we're going to value, and we're going to default to a hello world. Again, it doesn't really matter what the default value is. This is just for us sort of using it while we're developing, right? And this text area, I'm now going to say you're going to be 100% wide, 100% high, and remove this mean width and mean height, right? So this is our text area now. And then I'm going to go and bind this to our value. So it says hello. And we can go and change this. Hi there. I am a text area, right? And of course, this triggers our scroll bar because we are not automatically resizing at all right now, because that's not really a thing you can do with text areas. So, and we can see that our value is now updated. This got the new value. But so since we can't resize the text area, the hack we're going to use now is we're going to introduce something else that does resize. So if we introduce a paragraph here, and bind this to the same value. Now, what we'll notice is this paragraph does resize, right? This does automatically fit that size of the text inside it, where, for example, the text area does not. And let's just put them up next to each other. So I'm just going to fix the styling here. We're going to set both these to be, actually, let's set them to grow and just set it to 0. We'll do the same for the paragraph. So this way, they're both taking up half of the space next to each other. And as we sort of change them here, we can even add a little bit. Let's add a little bit of a outline on this, just to sort of let people see. So it's renders outside, but you can see the outline here. So sort of show us what the size of this is. And actually, this one, we want the height to be fit content, right? So it's only going to take up as much height as it needs and nothing more. Oh, so when we're inside here, what we can see is that this text area is only ever taking up as much space as needed and not more, right? But what we also see is because this paragraph is now extending the height of the container, we're actually getting somewhat what we want in terms of resizing this text area. So we're sort of on the way. Like the next thing we need to do is then we need to make sure that the styling and everything around layout of those two elements are exactly the same. So for this text area, we're going to add padding of 8 pixels. We quite like that. So we're going to keep it, and then we're going to set the font to, I think we'll set it to small and the weight to regular. Regular, right? And we're going to do exactly the same for the paragraph. It's going to say 8 pixel padding, font should be small, weight should be regular. And they're also both the same font. And it's important that especially all the font properties are the same because they really matter in terms of like how big this is going to be. And again, the goal here is to get this paragraph to actually be exactly the same size as the text area as we're typing it, right? So now we can see now these two line up perfectly, right? Now there's only one little thing where we'll notice it starts behaving weird. And that is when we add a new line, then actually this text, this thing doesn't, the paragraph here doesn't actually expand until we start typing it, and then we get back to the same size. And the reason for that is that this paragraph is here set to respect white space inside of the content, but it doesn't respect white space after the, or break line in this case, specifically after the content. And that's just kind of how, again, CSS or the web by default works. So in order to get it to respect it after the content, you need another little hack. And what we can do here is just make sure that there's always some content after this. And here, the way you can actually do that is add a text element after. Actually, I think it's even better adding a span. So we add a span after, and then we just clear out this text. Don't even think we need to set a space. I think this is fine. So let's see if this works. Yeah. So now we have, by having just this empty span afterwards, our paragraph sort of understands that, okay, there's a thing after my break line, and then it's not the last one, and it doesn't automatically truncate it, right? So you can kind of see how this whole component is a little bit hacky in the sense that none of this is entirely using any of the components the way they were designed to be used, right? We're sort of exploiting some of the properties here to actually get the functionality we want. And sometimes when you're building things, that's kind of the way you have to do it, right? So now we actually have a resizing text area. Like we sort of solved the problem, but of course we don't really want this thing over here as well. So we kind of want to get rid of that. And one way we can get rid of it, but we still want it to be there, right? Because it still needs to resize everything. So one way we can do that is, first of all, cut the outline out. That's the easy one, right? None, right? And the second bit is we can set its opacity to 0. And now it's still there. And it's still taking up, like it's still adding all the space and doing everything we need, but we can't see it. Of course, it's still taking up the space. So the last thing we're going to do is actually take our text area and we're going to change its position to absolute. And then we're going to say your width is now going to be 100 pixels. We don't want any of this grow and shrink nonsense. And what that does is that the paragraph is actually taking up the space, changing the size of this root element in our component. The text area is positioned absolute on top of that element and just always follows the same size of the parent. And we're really rendering the text in two different elements on top of each other, but you never see the back one. And even if we actually go into our text area, even if we clear out the background here, right? That doesn't change anything because, actually, we just need to quickly do one little thing is that, of course, the text area should be in front so that when we're clicking on it and interacting, that's the one, right? So we're going to change the order so the text area comes last. But because this here element is hidden, like has zero opacity, we're not ever gonna see it, right? So we're not ever gonna see it, even if we have semi-transparent text area. So this should now work exactly the way it should. So we'll have a text area and it'll expand the way we want it to, right? The last thing we're gonna do is what I mentioned to start with. We're gonna go and instead of using a variable, we're gonna create a attribute called value, and our test value it can be whatever. We can just say hello world again. Again, the test value is only used when you're working within the component. Whenever you're using it in some other context, this value comes from the parent element, right? We're gonna delete our. Actually, let's wait and do that, and then we're gonna emit a change event. Right. So now we can actually start using this component more or less like we would a text area. Actually, let's change this to input because we actually want the input. That's actually the one we want, right? Not the change event. So that this way it sort of matches up with what the actual text area, how that actually works, right? And then we're gonna go into our text area. We're gonna change this bind value to be our attribute value. And on input, which is, this was set when we bounded to the variable. On input, we're actually gonna trigger input with our event target value, right? So now we moved it to, instead of using the variable, we're actually using the attribute and we're emitting that attribute up. And of course, the last thing we need to do as well is make sure that's true for the paragraph as well, because that's what does the spacing. So we need to make sure this is also actually changed to the attribute. And now we can delete our variable because we don't need it anymore. So let's, I've got like a text area page here. Let's go and try and add this in. I'm going to add a variable message here. I'm going to start out nothing. That's fine. Going to add our responsive text area. We're going to change the value to be our message. And we're going to change the input event. We're going to set message to event. All good. So that should work. Div, this one has a min height. It doesn't really need that. Let's just cut that out. So let's go and test this. This is so very bright. Let's just change the color of, actually, let's just change the background color here. That's easier. So hello world, I am resizing. All right. So that's how you can build a resizable text area. It's very much a hacky solution for it. But then again, text areas don't really work the way we needed to in this case. So sometimes you've got to get your hands a bit dirty. I hope that helped and was educational. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and thank you very much, Jacob, for bringing us this problem.